Yes, I understood that from what you've been saying. And about Larry Kramer, you said that he was a master of techniques which helped you and other poets open up your boundaries to catch a view from a new perspective. Could you share perhaps one or two of his techniques with us?
Absolutely. I still have all my anciently old notebooks from when we first met, and I kept notes about what he said. One of the things he said was, don't ever shy away from the bizarre.
What does that mean?
That means don't ever think that anything is too strange to think about or to postulate on. Don't get scared away by something that appears bizarre. Another one is make outlandish statements. Those of us who write, poetic license is the rule of the game, and we get to make outlandish statements and paint things with a broad brush if we want to, and that's part of the nature and fun of being an artist of any kind, really. And I think one of the most valuable things that he taught me and others was that if a poem is about something real, change it around so that the fictive possibilities appear. And that's a really wonderful technique. Make something fictive in there with what's real to you about what you're writing. Exploring the fictive possibilities of a subject makes the poem broader. And I think we've all read poems or stories that were so personal that we almost felt left out at reading them. It's almost like the reader doesn't have a place in it. And,
yes.
And so if you explore the fictive possibilities, you give the reader a place in there. So those were
by broadening the subject, by loosening it up, you give a place for the listener to include themselves, you're saying?
Exactly.
Like my refrigerator that I'm working with. I should expand her horizons, perhaps.
Well, excuse me. The exercise. I can see that you're doing that. Just what you said about writing about the refrigerator. It tends to lend itself to after you write about the refrigerator itself, it can become something else. It sort of becomes, there's a truth in there about other things.
Yes.
So.
Okay. This is okay. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I love it. It's the bizarre section. As soon as you feel you're into the bizarre area, go with it. Make the statement.
Exactly.
Don't be shy. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Now, could you possibly read something that Larry wrote? I don't have his book, Brilliant Windows. I would love to hear something.
Absolutely, I would love to.
Okay.
I'm going to read. I'm going to read something called "The Fetus," and it's what we were just talking about. It's a poem about something real that explores the fictive.
Okay.
And
okay, good.
I'll read that.
Excellent.
In Missouri, where we had escaped Texas, we lived by the university. I roamed canyons of books, toured the Hall of Minerals, crystals in their black lights, wonderful as wounds of the living Christ. One as violently fearsome as a dinosaur jaw. In a basement, the fetus was my particular friend, a blanched fist, a tuber, a figure like a Buddha carved by an Eskimo, and speaking, if only less than a whisper from its clouding solution. Be nothing, it said. No one, of a dark shelf, ignored but by your own. Dissolve. A poet, slowly into this strange form, glow, but ever more distant, the ice and grit of a comet.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he was an amazing writer, and right there is what we were just talking about. You're talking about something that's very real and giving it a broader horizon.
Yes. Okay. What about your other heroes, your other heroines? Could you just name a few and in a sentence or two tell me what they mean to you, how they inspire you?
Sure. Robert Frost is one of my writing heroes because of the way he captures complex feelings with very simple language. He writes about loneliness, which is a simple idea, but he writes about it in such a way that you really feel it. I'm afraid Robert Frost was known for being very mean, so that's probably why he knew what loneliness was. He wrote this wonderful poem. One of my favorite poems of his is called "The Hill Wife."
Yes.
And I'll just to exemplify what I'm talking about, simple language. I'll read part of it.
Okay.
This is part 5 of the poem "The Hill Wife," and it's called "The Impulse." It was too lonely for her there, and too wild, and since there were but 2 of them and no child, and work was little in the house, she was free, and followed where he furrowed field or felled tree. She rested on a log and tossed the fresh chips with only a song to herself on her lips. And once she went to break a bough of black alder. She strayed so far she scarcely heard when he called her, and didn't answer, didn't speak or return. She stood, and then she ran and hid in the fern. He never found her, though he looked everywhere, and he asked at her mother's house, was she there? Sudden and swift and light as that, the ties gave, and he learned of finalities beyond the grave.
Wow, that's so sad.
The poem leaves me with, yeah, and it's just those simple words, they leave me with that feeling of loneliness. So,
a huge gash in the heart.
Another poet of it is.
Yeah.
Another poet I like very much is an American poet named Amy Lowell. I don't know if you know her. She died in 1925, fairly contemporary. And she's one of my favorites. Her strength is very inspiring, and her way of getting to the heart of things, just grabbing you and right away and pulling you into the heart of things, is just amazing. She does that in a poem called...
do you have an example?
I do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay, but I do love her work. She does that she has a poem called Patterns, and it's both an anti-war poem and a love poem.
Uh-huh.
And I won't read it all, it's very long, but if you aren't familiar with her work, look some of it up. She's fabulous.
Okay.
I've skipped great parts of this, but this'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about in the strength of the words. She says, I walk down the patterned garden paths in my stiff brocaded gown, with my powdered hair and jeweled fan. I, too, am a rare pattern, as I wander down the garden paths. Not a softness anywhere about me, only whalebone and brocade, and I sink on a seat in the shade of a lime tree, for my passion wars against the stiff brocade. In my bosom is a letter I have hid. It was brought to me this morning by a rider from the Duke. Madam, we regret to inform you that Lord Hartwell died in action Thursday night. I stood upright, held rigid to the pattern by the stiffness of my gown. Up and down I walked, up and down. In a month, he would have been my husband. In a month, here underneath this lime, we would have broke the pattern, he for me and I for him. He as colonel, I as lady, on this shady seat. He had a whim, the sunlight created blessings, and I answered, it shall be as you have said. Now he is dead. In summer, in winter, I shall walk up and down the patterned garden paths in my stiff brocaded gown. I shall go up and down in my gown, gorgeously arrayed, boned and stayed, and the softness of my body will be guarded from embrace by each button, hook, and lace. For the man who should loose me is dead, fighting with the Duke in Flanders in a pattern called war. Christ, what are patterns for?
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's an amazing poem.
Okay. Okay, so jumping from the laced up bodice, let's talk about something that we do to free ourselves, experimenting in poetry.
Okay.
When I think of experimenting, I think of first opening my mind and then seeing what comes out of me. And to do this, I might use music or art, and it puts me in a totally different frame of mind. I might also use other things, which I won't mention now. How about you? How do you ready yourself? How do you ready yourself to be experimental?
Photographs is one way. That seems to bring up, looking at photographs seems to bring up all sorts of ideas for me. I love books of photos, and not just the art photos, but photos of people I don't know, or old Victorian photos. I've just become really fascinated with these old Victorian mourning photos, in which the dead are posed as if they're just sleeping.
Yes.
And you've seen those, or the photographers clamp the deceased. They clamp them in a standing position so that they look fully awake, and either by some mechanism to hold their eyes open, or they painted pupils on their eyes. And looking at those always gives me very unusual ideas.
I've never tried it.
They're fascinating. Anyway, another thing I do is I'll read something that I find unusual. There's a writer, Philip K. Dick is his name.
Yes.
And his books make me very restless and feeling like creating something different, going someplace else. So that's what I do.
I see. That's very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. I also find that if I'm lacking any kind of input, I'll just listen to Allen Ginsberg either sing or recite one of his poems. Yeah. My favorite is Sunflower Sutra.
Absolutely.
Do you know it?
I love Sunflower Sutra. Yes, I do know it. I love it.
I love it.
And I love it. I love the recordings of him doing it with the little finger symbols.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I love that. Yeah. It really is. Yeah.
When you listen to someone so passionate, you can't help but just, take something from it. So, I'm going to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're in the middle of a sentence. Please do it.
No, I was just going to say. Excuse me. I was just going to say that Ginsberg was not. He wasn't just a poet. He was the poem.
Oh yes.
His life and what he stood for and everything he was so much himself and a poem in his own. I mean, he was just this walking, breathing poem.
He was passionate about everything.
Yeah, I like him too.
He was passionate about everything.
Absolutely.
He led everybody after him, and he wasn't ashamed of a thing. He was, brilliant.
Yes, that's what I truly love about him. He was not ashamed of anything about himself, and the only things he disliked were things that were cruel. I just love that about him.
Yes. Okay, let's go back to you.